Welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Today we are going to be working on part 2 of this Crumb quilt wall hanging. And today I'm going to share with you how I've done, or will be doing, some Trapunto on it. I am using some plastic template pieces to sketch on some of the areas that I have Trapuntoed. I've finished this area right here, and because I used the blue pen to draw the designs on here, I wet it down. I sprayed it with some water to remove the blue ink. I'm going to show each of these steps to you here as I've worked through it, but I just wanted to give you an overview of how this is going to look as I progress through this quilt. The stencils that I'm using are from June Taylor, and they came on a little chain here, so there's a variety of different sizes, and I'm using the larger size in the center, then I'm using the second size here and a smaller size here, and then I've got 2 different sizes there that I'm using. For any Trapunto design, it has to be completely enclosed. You can't have any open ends to your design, so this area right here, which has the Trapunto batting stuffed in the back of it, that is already, it's completely enclosed. And let me show you the back of that. And I'll be walking you through each of these steps, but just to kind of give you an idea, I put a square of batting on the background of my quilt, and I had drawn the design on the front of it, the inside and the outside design. And then I went to my machine and did a free motion quilting, and on that blue line I used, again, a marker. And definitely test your pen on your fabric before you mark on your actual quilt, because you want to make sure that these markings do come out. So make sure you test. Mine came out just beautifully. And so I sketched around the outer template and I sketched around the inner template. So now I have a completely enclosed area there to do my Trapunto. I had a square of batting back here, and I did an outline stitch on the front using free motion quilting. I did this inside and the outside section here. I think you can see it better there. Then I came to the back of the quilt here, and I simply cut close to the edges and removed the outside of that square of batting. And I pulled the batting and the quilt apart, made a little snip, and then cut out the inside of the batting. Be sure you don't cut your fabric. You don't want to cut your fabric. But now this has a batting to it, or the Trapunto. And so when I actually quilt this entire quilt, this is going to have a little bit extra batting in it. And so that will make a nice, beautiful, poofy Trapunto as I'm working through it. Now I did, just so you have an idea of what I'm going to do in the center, I'm going to do some really tiny squiggly lines when I'm quilting, when I actually do the entire quilting. So I wanted you to see what I'm going to be doing in there. The quilting that I'll be doing on the outside of this probably won't be quite as tiny, but it will still be tiny, which will make this Trapunto area really pop beautifully. So typically you would not do the quilting in there as I have done. You would wait and do that quilting when you're actually ready to quilt the whole quilt. But I just wanted you to see what this is going to look like. Hopefully I'll get to the point where I can get this entire wall quilt up on my long arm, and I'll show you all of it. But now I'm going to take you step by step through what I have done here. I'm going to trace out the designs, and I'm going to show you how I've used these squares of batting. I'm using leftover, it's a puffy batting. Because these are leftover remnants that have been in a container, I really don't know the brand. I just know that it's a nice puffy one. I want to say it's a Dream Wool, possibly, but it's puffier, and so I'll use a regular 80 cotton when I bat the entire quilt and put it on my long arm and quilt the whole thing. But for the Trapunto, I'm using little squares of a thicker batting. If you don't have a thicker batting, that's not required. You can use the same batting for the entire quilt as well as on the Trapunto. It's just going to have a double batting where you're trapuntoing, and so that'll make it a nice puffy design. So now let me take you through step by step on how I've accomplished this. The first thing you'll want to do is draw your designs. I have my rectangle sitting on top of a grid underneath. You're probably not able to see this grid, but I can see it, and I am lining up these lines on my template with that grid because I want it to match up with all the rest of this. I'm going to stand up and just ensure everything looks even. There we go. And I'm using one of these, mine is a blue pen, which is water soluble. So when you put water on there, it will disappear. And I am simply tracing this design. The next thing I want to do is this is the size I had used. Now I want to trace this one. And again, I'm lining up the lines within the template. I'm lining up those lines on the grid below this fabric, which you probably can't see, but I can. And again, I am tracing this. You need to have a Trapunto design that is completely enclosed. So that's what I have accomplished right here. You could Trapunto the entire flower, but I think that's just too much, too big of an area. So I am just creating a nice Trapunto area there, and then I am going to stitch in the center here with some micro stitching when I'm doing my long arm, and I'll do that also around the entire area here, and it will just be a very pretty design that it will create. Then what you're going to do is go into your battings, and this is where you can use leftover batting pieces and put those behind that area. And again, you're probably not able to see this, but I can tell that I have my design on the batting squares all behind here. And I am going to just pin it down here real quickly. And then I'll take it to the machine. I have my machine set up for free motion quilting, and I am simply going to quilt a stitch on that line and then come in here and stitch on that line. Then I'm going to go to the back side of the design and cut away the excess outer part and the excess inner part so that it ends up looking just like that. And there's the other one right there that I've cut apart. So I'm going to take this to my machine. I'll take you with me, and we will go ahead and get that stitched. But here is what I just traced right there, the outer side and the inner side of that design. Now I have it at my machine. I've got the batting behind there. I just cut some squares, and now I'm going to bring up my thread. I have my machine set for free motion quilting. Bring up my thread here, and I'm just using a cream colored thread as I stitch this. For the bobbin, I am using a bobbin thread, which is a thinner thread, finer thread. I believe mine is a 70 weight. And then for the top thread, I'm just using an Aurifil thread, and you could use, there are threads that they make that are water soluble. You could use that. Mine is not water soluble. I don't mind that I'll have my thread outline remaining in the quilt. So I'm just using regular thread, but you can use whatever you want. Maybe you want it, the outline of this flower to really pop as well. So you could certainly do that. Maybe use a variegated, whatever you choose. So I am set up for free motion quilting, and I am simply going to go through here and try to follow those lines as well as I can. And there we go. So it has been stitched. That Trapunto area is completely enclosed. I'm going to cut my threads, and then I'm going to bring you back to the table, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to trim away the excess batting. You can see here that I've done my stitching, cut my threads. Now I'm going to flip it to the back. Can you see that? Yes, you can. And I want to get rid of this excess batting. We don't want any of that to be in our quilt. And you want to be very, very careful as you're cutting apart your batting. There are different types of scissors that you can use. This little one here, I've tried a number of scissors, but this is the one that gives me the most control. And it's just a small little scissors. It's very sharp. Be very careful that you're not cutting into your fabric on the front of the quilt. That would be very disappointing if that happened. So I'm just trimming away the excess batting, holding it up and cutting as I go. I'm not cutting into the stitching. I'm just cutting really close to the stitching, probably maybe 1/8 of an inch or so. Maybe in some cases 1/16 of an inch. But we're getting rid of all of that. I think my arm is in your way. All right, so that takes care of the outside. Now we have to cut away that inside. I did go ahead and Trapunto on the front for this sample flower here, but typically you would always cut that away, and then you would only do that micro stitching when you get to the actual quilting part. But I wanted you to see what it's going to look like. So now I need to pull the fabric from the front away from the batting. So I'm pulling them both, and I'm going to make a tiny little snip. I do not want to snip into my fabric on the front, and then I am cutting this apart. This is just helping me to get in there very easily. Now I can go around and cut all of these out, because you want that fabric, all of the batting to be gone, and all there will be then is just the fabric, so that you can do some micro quilting in there and make this Trapunto really pop. All right, so that has been cut. We've got the little flower there. It's completely enclosed. And so when we actually put this quilt on the long arm with its batting, there will be double batting everywhere where you see these Trapunto flowers, and it will really make a beautiful, beautiful design. So I've got that one done. So for this corner area here, which is this is the background or the pie slice of my Drunkard's path, I'm using a smaller flower, and then I'll use an even smaller flower for the inside. So I have lined it up on my grid underneath, which you probably can't see, but that's what I want to make sure I've lined it up on. And I am going to trace around. Again, always make sure that your blue pen or whatever pen you use will disappear when you need it to disappear. That's very important. Some of them are water soluble. Some of them just disappear. They're just disappearing inks, and they'll completely go away on their own. So there are different types of pens. So just make sure that whatever type pen you do use on your quilt, it will in fact disappear using whatever technique it requires. So I have these two done, and I'm going to use these same two in all of the center portions or Drunkard's path units in my quilt. So I'm simply going to have a whole bunch of flowered Trapunto around this wall quilt. So I'm going to continue tracing all of them. Then I'm going to use all of my little pieces of fabric that I have cut out in various sizes, or batting, I should say. So this batting is for, some of these are for the bigger flowers, some of these are for this medium size, and some of these are for the small size. So I have all of these cut out, and I will put them on the back of the quilt. I will get those pinned in when I'm ready to take everything back to the machine and start stitching the flowers down. All right, as you can see here, I have all of my stencils, flowers drawn on my fabric. So everything is on there. And now what I'm going to do is flip this quilt over and place the appropriate sized batting behind each of these and pin them down underneath on the back side. And then I'll be ready to take it to my machine and do the free motion quilting on the blue lines. So I have all of the batting pinned down. As you can see, all of the little squares are pinned on the wrong side of the quilt, exactly where I need them to be. So now I'm going to take it to the machine and get it stitched. I have done the stitching on every one of the squares. So everything has been stitched, and now I have to go around and get all of it trimmed, get the batting trimmed away from the outside edges and from the inside edges. You could, if you wanted to, if you wanted your Trapunto to be really thick, you could add 2 squares of batting behind each of these, and that would even make your Trapunto much more, it would pop much more on the front if you chose to do that. I've just put 1 square of batting on each of mine. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut. It took about 20 minutes for me to sew all of these little flowers, and I did a free motion quilting on my Janome machine here. Now I'm going to cut. Probably is going to take me 20 to 30 minutes to get all of the cutting done. And again, what I'm going to be doing is identical to what I showed you earlier. I'm going to cut away the outside of the batting and the inside of the batting. I have everything cut. So now I am ready to load this onto the quilt machine and get it quilted. I've got to get a backing and my batting, and this is the back of the quilt, as you can see, and I need to get it loaded. You've seen a little bit of how I've stitched the micro stitching over here. I've set my long arm on the manual with the speed of about 25 to 30%, so it's really slowed down, and that allows me to do that tiny little micro stitching. And so I'm going to continue doing some micro stitching, and when I get to these the blue circle or the blue flowers, I am literally sewing again on those blue flowers. I do keep the micro stitching on as I'm stitching around there. I'm not changing the settings on my machine as I'm doing that. So I'm going to also stitch on that lines in the center, and then I'm going to come right in here and do some micro stitching in there. And so let me show you how this is done. I had to stop and move the camera out of the way. The machine bar was hitting the camera. So let me get back to what I was doing here. I think I'm going to show you now. I'm going to stop, pick that thread up to the top. And I'm going to go to the inside. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stitch on the blue line, the flower, and I'm doing an outline stitch of it. Now, had I used a water-soluble stitch the first time when I did the stitching of the batting to the back of the quilt, then once I do the second stitching, you wouldn't see two lines of stitching. I'm not concerned about that because I'm not going to submit this for a judging. This is just a casual quilt for me that I'm going to enjoy. So each of the flower petals on the outside and the inside will have two lines of stitching. It's not really that noticeable. But if you don't like that, then when you do your free motion quilting of putting the batting on the back of this, make sure you use a water-soluble stitching. And then when you come and do the quilting, as I am doing, either on your long arm or your domestic machine, there will only be one line of stitching because then you can spritz it with water and it will remove the thread as well as any blue marking. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the outline stitch for the center. Now I'm going to do micro stitching on the inside. And the micro stitching on the inside of this little flower is even tinier. I'm going to get as close as we can to the blue lines. There we go. And now I can bring my thread to the top. And the inside is done, and I have outlined the outside as well as the inside of the petal. So this is the petal that I just worked on here. I did the inside. I outlined both the inside and the outside of the petal. This is nice and poofy there. I've got to continue doing my micro stitching here. Up over here for the Drunkard's Path, I simply did a feather. So I've done some feathers here, as you can see, and I've just done micro stitching all the way across on here. And here is where I've actually spritzed it and removed the blue ink. So you're not seeing the blue ink here. I have not yet spritzed this to remove the blue ink. And so that's what I have done so far. I'm in the middle of my quilt now. I have gone ahead and done an outline stitch. I just did some simple straight stitching around some of the seams for the border, nothing fancy at all. Just secured them all. And then I did an outline stitch around this Drunkard's Path pie shape. And then I again created these feathers here and the feathers over here. You can kind of see it better on the dark. Now I am going to go ahead and outline stitch on this inside and outside of my petal, and then I'm going to do the micro stitching on both of these. So I'll let you see me do that. And again, for my long arm, I am going to turn on the manual. I am going to turn the speed down to about 25 to 30%. And I do have my left hand is always on the quilt. It is something that I cannot stop. I always got to have my hand on the quilt. So I call myself a one-armed long armer. So my right hand is up on the handlebar, but nothing is on my left handlebar because this hand is always down here. And maybe it's because I do a lot of ruler work. I'm not sure, but this hand is always down here. So you'll see it. And I apologize if it gets in the way sometimes, but it's just something that I always find myself doing, and I don't even know. When you're micro stitching up close to you want to get as close as you can to the lines so that you're sure to create that nice puffy area. And my micro stitching on the inside of the flower is even tinier and more dense than it is on the outside of the flower. Okay, so that one was done. Now I'm going to stitch out here. I'm maintaining the same micro stitch settings for the outline. It's working out just fine, so I'm not worried about that. You can certainly change the settings when you do this straight line if you choose to. I see that my handlebar got in the way of my camera again. Okay, I'm going to hit the camera again, but I think you've gotten to see quite a bit there of what I have done. And here you see where I have removed the blue markings. I've simply taken a spray bottle of distilled water and I've sprayed it on the areas where the markings were, and they are just going right away. So it works out very well. So when you look at this quilt, these areas look funny, but they're wet and they'll dry. As I'm quilting, they're just drying. It's not like there's a lot of water that I'm putting on there, but it's a simple way to remove all the markings even as you're stitching. The quilt is complete except for the binding. I've got to get the binding on and the sleeve and so forth, but I've got it all quilted. I really love how it turned out. Very simple to do. And look at how those beautiful little flowers, those petals, just pop out with that trapunto. And I simply used one layer of batting for the trapunto and then, of course, a complete layer of batting for the entire quilt. And just used some I used some Drunkard pads templates. When I created the center square and the outer square, I used crumbs as I crumbed this fabric together. I used adding machine tape to create all of these sashings and borders. And then I used some flower stencils or templates to design my trapunto designs on my quilt. And then I used micro stitching as I quilted it. Please let me know if you're going to go ahead and make one of these quilts. It's really a lot of fun. Please comment below. Let me know what your plans are. I hope that you'll try crumb quilting at least. And hopefully you'll also try the trapunto. Hope you've enjoyed the content of this video. If you do like what I provide, please don't forget to like and subscribe and comment below. I really love to read the comments from my viewers. And thank you so much. And until next week, happy quilting.